So our next speaker is Darral Campbell, and Darral is the manager for Dementia Canterbury. And as a Cantabrian, I can hand on heart just say that she is a regional treasure, just such an enormously effective, passionate visionary for really being on the forefront of what's being offered. But today, Darral is actually going to be talking about her insights from an opportunity to head overseas to see what's happening in other countries and what that might tell us about what best practice services might look like for people living with younger onset dementia wari. So thank you, Darral.
Oh, thank you, Susan. Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Darral Campbell, tōku ingoa. Hello, everybody. I'm Darral from Dementia Canterbury, and it's my pleasure to share with you a report that's taken a while to come about. In 2020, I was a lucky recipient of a Winston Churchill Fellowship to look at younger onset services in Europe. But it took till 2023 due to COVID to be able to actually go. And this year, the report was finally completed and presented. So that's what I'm going to share with you. It was an invaluable experience, and it came back having me even more inspired about what things could look like. And sometimes when the going gets tough, it's great to actually come back and have some ideas about things that you do see working and working well. So, with in Aotearoa with over 5 million people, we've really struggled to develop quality, accessible services for people living with young onset dementia. It's really important to talk about the population and the split in population between the north and the south, because that obviously impacts on services and accessibility. And that lack of differential services for people who have younger onset. I mean, currently it's very difficult for those of us working in the dementia space to get any kind of funding that says younger onset people and their whānau have specific needs. It's if you've got dementia, you're all the same, and it simply isn't. One size does not fit all. And I guess, you know, we have to come out and say these things. Our health system doesn't seem to see younger onset dementia as a particular priority. We see it as a significant priority, and we want to highlight that and talk about that and start, you know, the conversations so that hopefully those working at government level start to take seriously the needs of younger onset people and people living with younger onset, I should say, and whānau. So the background to this is, as I've said, on average, these are international statistics. On average, for younger onset dementia, people see between 2 and 5 different consultants or experts before they get a diagnosis. Bridget talked and referenced some of this already. There are stats out there that say on average it takes 2.2 years to get a diagnosis for people aged over 65, but 4.4 years for people who are under 65. I think, Bridget, your stat was slightly less than that in Aotearoa, which is great. GPs often attribute symptoms in younger people to other things. So initially, they're not necessarily thinking that this could be younger onset dementia. And so it's relatively common for people to present to us saying, I was treated for anxiety or depression or menopause, but not that there was any thought to the fact that I might be experiencing younger onset dementia. There is that higher risk for inherited dementia or rarer dementias in younger onset. Whoops, what have I done here?
Go back.
Yeah, bear with me. No.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So our traditional models are designed for people who are older. They're not designed for people who are younger. And at the moment, it's a kind of situation where it's like ordering a pizza and saying, do you want anchovies or not? It's not part of the expected makeup of the service. It's an option, maybe, if you're lucky. And so that's not acceptable going forward. We have to make it that it's an integral part of service and that people should expect that it's available. And we need to think differently about what younger people want. And over again, the evidence is there. Holistic service, knowledge about dementia, family-centred. What does that mean? And how do we unpack that? Specialist programs definitely are shown to make a difference. We have inconsistent underfunded services in New Zealand with no best practice in place. And that variance is often felt particularly in our rural areas where access to services is even more piecemeal. Key organisations do try and fill the gaps. The wonderful work that YODAT's doing, Dementia Auckland, Dementia Wellington, lots of others in this space. International reviews highlight the significant gaps in post-diagnostic support for younger individuals. So there's international evidence supporting the lack of support across the board. You'll hear more about the Dementia Canterbury program as it's evolved. I wanted to share with you this great model. I don't know how many of you have heard about the Angela project model, but it's something that I used as part of the process of looking at how dementia younger onset services were constructed and delivered to help me focus on areas. This is a big piece of research that took place in the UK, particularly related to younger onset, and this is what came from it. It's a really good model. So the key questions I asked when I went to visit, and I went to Alzheimer's Canada, British Columbia, I went to Alzheimer's Scotland in Glasgow, and I went to the Netherlands and a dementia specific centre in Florence, which is just out of Den Haag, looking at their younger onset dementia services. I focused on how do you get your referrals and what's the diagnostic process? What's the range and extent of your services? How are your services accessible? And what are the specific services that you offer, community and residential? And then the all-important and quite difficult question around funding. How are services funded? So at a meso level, I was looking at integration, whether care was managed by specialists, whether it was consistent, whether it was age appropriate, whether it was holistic, whether it was responsive, and whether it was accessible. That really helped me understand the context of the country that I was visiting and the way in which their services were constructed. So all of the services I visited had services for families and clients that were unique to younger onset. What became evident visiting all of them was that there was research and there was practice evidence that specialist services needed to be distinct from mainstream, and that they needed to cater for people throughout the entire dementia journey, not be piecemeal. That if we were looking at best practice, it was really important not to think that services stopped and started when people got a diagnosis and then didn't get referred or didn't get support in the community or didn't get support when they accessed residential care or respite. Because the Angela report exists, it seems a wonderful opportunity to use it as a basis to develop a model of best practice for younger onset in Aotearoa. And it clearly needs development so that it has a tangata whenua and Pacifica lens. But it's a great basis, and it would be great to think that that's something that we could work on in some way as we move forward. The evidence supports the fact that there should be availability of specialist younger onset programs in all our major cities across New Zealand, that the populations exist for that to be real. That we need specialist and interdisciplinary staffing. That a lot of the research that came through, a lot of the feedback from people living with younger onset dementia and whānau is around having specialists in this area who understand younger onset dementia, who understand the realities of living with children, with teenagers, with the impact of a loss of work, financial issues, partner stress, that those are things that require a specialist knowledge base. So what would I be recommending? That our programs need to be designed to be adaptable to the changing needs of individuals throughout the dementia journey, including options for respite that allow continued involvement in community-based programs. That's a big one, and in the examples that I'm going to give you shortly, I was inspired about how that could happen. The single site model, where everything is in one place, is a wonderful model, and I'll show you it shortly. But replicating this in New Zealand in the current climate is potentially quite challenging, where we've got all of our residential care sitting separate from our community care. And that's one of the silos that we have, which makes it difficult for people to come in and out of services in a way that might fit their needs. Doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't look at that and that we shouldn't think about how we could develop something working more closely together across the spectrum to work at all levels. The role of neurologists. I was interested, Bridget, in your stat around the number of people being diagnosed by a neurologist. Again, in all of the programs that I saw, it seemed to make a significant difference if the diagnosis was taking place in cognitive disorders clinics or environments by neurologists. And that was one less barrier for people. The notion of being referred to an aged care environment to get a diagnosis for some people was definitely a barrier. Oops, and that we need designated funding. I've done it again. So I wanted to show you the places I visited in the populations so that you could get a sense of what they're like. So Vancouver had a population similar to the whole of New Zealand. Glasgow, a population not dissimilar to a large city like Canterbury, say, in New Zealand, and Den Haag, a similar population to Canterbury. Sorry, I'm having some difficulty with my slides. So, the creme de la creme of models that I saw was absolutely the Netherlands. To say I was enamoured is an understatement. I think we have much to learn from the way in which they've looked at developing their services. So they have interdisciplinary teams who are working exclusively in the young onset space, physio, OT, speech language therapy, social work, ecology, art and music therapists, and medical professionals. And that the teams work with individuals as needed. They have a designated case manager, somebody who is engaged right from the get-go and is there throughout the journey, maintains regular contact with the person living with dementia, but also with whānau. And they have regular access to other team members for specialist assessments. So I visited the Mariho program and was able to spend some time in it. And it caters for people who are living in the community, who are needing to access respite, and then who are needing to go into care. And it caters for people all on one site, which I'll work you through. So it allows for respite services so that people living in the community can go and have one overnight stay, if that's going to work for them. Somebody can go in on a Friday night or a Sunday night, and on the Monday morning wander downstairs to the program that they go to during the week, and they know everybody. The same team of people follow the person through the dementia journey. So the same social worker, the same physio would be involved with the person whilst they're living in the community and attending services, whilst when they enter respite and when they enter into a care, 24-hour care environment. At Florence, they had 2 floors dedicated to younger onset residential care, and the units were small. So they would have small units of 8 people living with younger onset, and they would have a much more home-like environment. So smaller lounges, kitchens where people could walk in and out and make a cup of tea or interact, spaces where families could do the same. And they meant that people, again, were not in environments that weren't unfamiliar. If they had been coming to the programs for some time, then they could still access some of those things. They could go downstairs to the cafeteria. They could go to a group if they felt like it. The residential care environments were very nice. I saw a couple of the rooms, and you might see a bit of a photo later. They were orientated to be definitely not hospital-like and not rest home-like, but to be home-like. So people had double beds, stereo systems, artworks, whatever they wanted, really. But they were small and they were inviting. And that they had a model of care planning and access so that the clients, as I said, could continue to access all of the services that they might have used initially. Day groups, cafe, gardens. They would have still a program at the gym if that's what they wanted. They would have still an opportunity to go to art therapy if that's what they wanted, or music therapy. They were still able to access everything that was in the building. It was a big positive that the people I met in the program talked about, that they had the same therapist throughout the dementia journey, that they didn't, as their dementia progressed, have another person coming in, so that they got to know and trust the interdisciplinary team, and the interdisciplinary team got to know them and their whānau very, very well. And that seemed a great leveller and a great opportunity to have consistency and trust throughout that journey as things got more difficult. This is a great, this is a photo taken in the cafe. And so that, of course, is a beautiful looking bookshelf, but it's in fact the doors going out, designed so that it doesn't appear to be a barrier for people, and it's not an invitation to be constantly leaving once you're in inside. What's happening here? Whilst they didn't have a formalised education program, the staff had a regular get-together in the cafe where they ran a group that meant that in an informal way they provided education, and that group was open to everyone who might be using the facility, no matter which part of the facility you were using, or whether you were a whānau member or a care partner or a person living with younger onset, you could access those sessions. The social worker offered ongoing education and support, more individually tailored. Support groups were available for people, particularly around partners and around children, the individual needs of children. Groups were led by the psychologist who was involved, another discipline that was involved, and social worker. And there's the informal meetings in the cafe that I referenced. The ongoing support of the interdisciplinary team throughout the dementia journey. What happens, one of the questions I asked is, you know, if somebody goes into young onset dementia care, what happens as they age? And so there is a point at which, at around 70, they would then say to families, because the upper floor, it was, I think, 4 floors in this building. The upper floor had hospital level care. So if the person needed hospital level care, they could go to the upper floor if the family chose that, or they could move the person to another facility. But that always is a concern about moving people, which is why I was interested in how they managed it there. So what criteria do they use to access services? Based on individual needs. Available services included supported living as all the way up through to nursing home care. There's the at age 70 clients moving or transitioning. Service choices are influenced by the needs of the person with dementia and the family. These are the gardens at Marea Hove, and people were able to freely wander through the grounds, which people could garden if they wanted. They could pick flowers if they wanted. They could sit and picnic. They could do whatever they liked in the garden. It's a beautiful, peaceful space. So in one place, you have community support, you have respite care, you have sheltered living, you have nursing home care and hospital care all on one site. Similar services are available in the wider Amsterdam region. I only saw this one, but there are a number of others, which is really exciting. Where's it based? This was again really interesting. So Marea Hove is based in a mixed housing area amongst community shops and other services. So it felt like it was very much a part of the community. It didn't look like a hospital or a rest home. It looked like a community building. The cafe and garden are open to the community, and people can join the gardening group. How are services funded? So in the Netherlands, there's a mandatory insurance, and in many places, Canada had something similar around the mandatory insurance. I guess in New Zealand and Aotearoa, the only thing that's mandatory is ACC. And it does make you wonder about the uneven playing field that's created because we differentiate between injury and illness. If additional specialist or residential care is required, then there was some process to do a funding assessment. I didn't get to the detail of that. What they were very clear about is cost is not generally a barrier. There is income testing if financial situations change, but people are able to access services regardless. Funding increases with the level of care. And I want to share some client stories. So this lovely gentleman talked to me, and one of the first things he told me was that at one point he and his whānau were all set to come to New Zealand, and he'd heard all about it and had a lifetime wish that they had come, but in the end they didn't. So he was very keen to talk to somebody from New Zealand. So he was a man living in the community, and he was attending the Younger Onset community program 3 times a week on average, but as he felt like. So he had some choice about whether he went or he didn't go. And I loved that aspect. He got the train there, and he also had a bike, which he was still riding, and sometimes he was able to ride his bike, or chose to ride his bike as well. He was living at home with his wife, who was in full-time care at work, and with their dogs. And he talked about the reason that he came to the program because he felt very socially isolated, that he was at home by himself because his wife was working and because his friends were working. And that aside from walking the dogs, he didn't really have anything to do at home. And that he particularly enjoyed being with people his own age and the social connection. He told me he was involved in an individualised gym program, which he really enjoyed because he enjoyed fitness, and that he enjoyed the gardens. He was involved in the gardening group and the other groups on site. He loved having lunch and coffees in the cafe. He told me about the respite service, and I just thought this was so cool about how he and his wife could opt for him to have respite so that she could go away for a weekend or just have a night off. And that he was more than willing to go to respite because it wasn't in a place that he wasn't unfamiliar with. It was a place that he went to on average 3 times a week. And that he could still access the services if they were on when he was there. I thought it was a wonderful creative use of respite that I'd just love to see developed in New Zealand, where we made respite more accessible and more around the needs of the person and the whānau. He said, if I wasn't coming here, I would just be sitting at home watching television, being nothing. He was something. I really enjoyed meeting him. The second man I talked to was living in supported care, and he had previously been coming to the community program. He'd attended most of the day services, and then he'd chosen to come into care. He shared his room with me. He's standing in the doorway of his room there, and he delighted in showing me through his bedsit type room, and took great pride in how he had set up his room to reflect him. He said that he'd had the same health professionals involved in his care, and he said, they know me. He started having periodic respite and then had a gradual move into the unit as things became more difficult for him at home. He continued to access the space within the complex and loved going into some of the groups in the day program and through the gardens with freedom. He could, there was no barrier for him being able to do that. So, in short, I acknowledge the Winston Churchill Scholarship and thank them for that opportunity to travel. There were things about all of the programs that were positive, but neither Scotland or Canada has anything like the programs that have been evolving clearly for quite some time in the Netherlands, and it provided great, rich fodder for me to bring back and think about in terms of the way we need to keep our service here at Dementia Canterbury dynamic and developing, and how we could start to think about what we develop in Aotearoa to meet the needs of people living with younger onset dementia. Thank
Oh,
you.
thank you so much, Darral. Well, needless to say, you've converted us. So, comments just about how wonderful that model is. And the dreaded question, do you have an idea about what it would take to get that onto the ground in New Zealand?
I guess the first thing is a recognition that younger onset is a specialist niche area, and that funding needs to reflect that. And the second is, I guess, to emulate a model like the Netherlands has requires us to think differently about the way in which we're delivering services, so that we're working much more in partnership between community and residential care, respite care, and that's possible. It's just not how we've been doing it. So I think where there's a will.
Oh, thank you so much. Now, I'm going to turn to Erica now, but I know that you'll still be there and we might be able to do some more questions jointly after Erica's presentation.